Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Evolution Lab podcast with me, Matt Roberts. I'm delighted you're here. We've got an incredible series lined up, and we'll be ongoing with some tremendous guests, from sports scientists to the guys who take part in sport and how their bodies function and work, and some amazing stories about how people cope with adversity and great challenges. And really, the whole series is all about getting under the skin of human performance and how we can live not just longer, but live better and well and be vital into any age category and have the best experience of our lives for as long as possible. First guest I've got on today's episode 1 is a great guy, Professor Tim Spector, who's really shot to prominence in the last couple of years in particular, but he is the expert on gut microbiome and all things related. Please do rate and review the podcast, and of course, share with your friends and subscribe, and make sure you're fully aware of all our great episodes coming up in the future with amazing guests. So, without further ado, enjoy the episode. Let's begin. So on today's episode of the Evolution Lab, my podcast, we've got someone whose name is going to be very familiar over the last year and a half in particular. There's been lots of interesting developments and work that my guest's been working on in a major way. And he said to explain not just about that, but a whole range of incredible things over his whole career that he's managed to do, achieve, accomplish, and discover that have changed all our lives in ways that we don't necessarily recognize or think about, and ways we can change probably some more that we need to know more about. Joining me today is Professor Tim Spector. Hi, Tim.
Hello there.
How are you? Fit, healthy, well?
Yes, very good. I just cycled back from work.
Good. That's very, very eco-friendly of you as well. So you managed to go brave London streets. So tell me, tell you what, in 60 seconds, tell me why people would be aware of your name, what you do for a living in detail, and what's the way you encompass your entire career existence in just 60 seconds.
Okay, my day job is as a epidemiologist at King's College in London. I run a world famous twin study there. I also am a co-founder of the nutrition science company Zoe, does personalized nutrition, and also run the Zoe COVID study that got up to 4.5 million people logging on it, and is still going today with over 1 million people logging every day, telling us what's going on in real time about COVID and also telling us about lifestyle and other things we can do about it. Very much feeding back in this idea of digital epidemiology.
So it's interesting because the Zoe study is something that I have to admit I didn't realize until recently, that the Zoe project wasn't set up for COVID. It was set up for something completely, not completely different, but linked into it, but wasn't for COVID at all. So tell me about that. It's more of a nutritional program, isn't it?
Yes. So 5 years ago, I was giving a talk about my book, Diet Myth, and 2 guys came up to me and said, we'd love to talk to you about getting a company together to do personalized nutrition involving gut microbes and the gut microbiome. And I sent them away and said, well, only if you get me lots of money and I can do some real science studies first, not interested in marketing and the usual rubbish. So they amazingly came back with it. And then we started the company Zoe, and that basically did these predict studies involving thousands of people and personalizing nutrition. That was going very well. We're just about to launch in the US when COVID hit and everything got shut down, all the studies stopped. And so the company, at my suggestion, but they very eagerly followed up, transferred what they were doing for a personal nutrition app into a personal symptom app to track COVID. And the company basically got this app ready in 5 days, a whole company just working full time on this. And
really incredible,
yeah,
staggering.
And it was an overnight social media sensation, really, without any money, without any marketing. And it just, was a zeitgeist. It just suddenly people wanted something and it filled that huge emotional need for people. And it is still a huge success.
I think that's right. It's interesting. I think at that point in time, there was a definite need to be able to feel as though you were understanding it better, or someone was understanding it better on your behalf, and that was basically you. And the app gave some real security, and clearly still does. A million people per day still signing in there doing symptom tracking. That's a huge percentage, 25% of the overall that ever signed on. So that's great. That's a really good, phenomenal ongoing coverage.
Yeah, and these people are loyal now, and they've got into a habit that I think is going to be generalizable to future health, because rather than seeing a GP every 3 or 4 months, people can keep a record of their symptoms. They know their vaccine records, whether they get a cold or flu, how they're feeling, and people are starting to learn that this is actually a very useful device, and we can play this back to people and use it as a triaging tool, or putting people to risk categories, or give people feedback about lifestyle as well. So I think, and we've done a diet questionnaire so people know where they are relative to other people in the UK. And I think this is really a futuristic tool that we're all going to be using in 5 years' time.
Sure.
And could, potentially transform, health services around the world.
I think that's right. That's the way that clearly medicine is developing, is this far more genuinely bespoke way to understand what's going inside your system. And there's no way to do that without this incredible close detailed tracking. And this sampler, this taster during COVID to do that has been a great kickoff point. But going forward, certainly Zoe going forward as a nutritional app and Gain and Aid, I think will be phenomenally successful. It's going to be really good to see that all grow. But I think we spoke a while ago about this in terms of what that app then gives to you. There's a whole nutrition plan, isn't there, that gives you some food that gets sent to you as well to eat based upon what your data is telling you. What gets sent?
You basically get sent a home kit, which is the equivalent of what we were testing in the hospitals in Mass General in Boston and St Thomas's Hospital in London. It's a pared down version of the exact test that we did on thousands of people, giving them identical meals, but monitoring them and asking them to do very little tests, and then seeing how they get on for the next 2 weeks. So they get some standard muffins, they get a glucose monitor, which you stick on your arm, which I know you've talked about before, and amazing devices. And also you get a blood prick kit to measure your blood fats 6 hours after a meal, so we can see how that you're getting rid of fats from your body. A microbiome test where you collect a stool sample and then stick it back in the post. And
sounds delightful.
Essentially, poo in the post is the technical term for that. And of course, then the app allows you to scan all your foods, log everything you're eating in a very detailed way, as well as recording energy levels, exercise, sleep, and of course, how you're feeling generally. So all these things at great detail are done for 2 weeks. Then you put all that gets shipped back, and then a few weeks later you get basically an algorithm that tells you for your own body, how you rank these foods. So you would get scores for all these foods based from 0 to 100, saying, bananas, which you might have thought is a good food, for me, turns out I get a score of about 3 out of 10 for a banana. And, quinoa might be 9 out of 10. Apples might be 5 out of 10. And it depends on how your responses to both your blood sugar response, your blood fat response, and of course, your microbiome. And it also gave me some advice about the microbiome, about particular foods to target to try and boost my good microbes and to suppress my bad ones. And the difference about this program to other studies, it's all based on published scientific papers, in the top journal, Nature, and, with collaborators around the world. So it's very transparent what we're doing.
Yeah.
This allows people to then go on without a diet as per se, just be able to select the food choices that make more sense to keep their scores low, to keep their peaks in sugar and fats and inflammation as low as possible. And you do that over time. So this is not just for a few weeks, but the idea is you do this for the rest of your life in a way. But giving you freedom to choose whatever food you want without really any restrictions and without really thinking about calories once. And so far, the results really are excellent. Virtually everyone loses weight, but surprisingly, the biggest factor was people feel more energy and they feel happy with it.
It's creating a real consistency, isn't it? So what you're doing with the approach of this is taking all the science you possibly can, all the data you possibly can, and creating consistencies across someone's life and their day. What we're trying to avoid is high peaks and troughs of any of those factors, whether that's sugar or the wrong fat lipids or inflammatory effects of any foods or anything else we're doing to ourselves. This is about trying to calm down and neutralize all those effects to give the body a chance to function in a way which is more efficient and produces therefore a better outcome from an energy point of view and really from a performance point of view as well. So if someone is trying to perform at a high level, avoiding those peaks and those troughs in any factor and make sure that the efficacy of how the blood can exist and transport energy around the system is all linked into this way of just controlling that sphere of data that's all there. So just touching back on one thing you mentioned there about the microbiome, quite honestly, this is something that it's funny with a lot of the guys who work for me are hugely knowledgeable about everything linked into exercise physiology and various parts of medicine and so on as well. The microbiome, I have to be honest, is something which is still very little understood. And we are thankfully reading more about it all the time within the media day to day. It's being probably misrepresented in social media enormously day to day. So tell me in good layman's terms, what exactly is the microbiome, first of all?
It's the word for the community of all the bugs, all the microscopic organisms, that's where the micro comes from, that live in our body. And generally, 99% of them are in our gut, our lower colon, lower intestine. So that's where the microbiome live, if you like. And it's a community of hundreds of trillions of these microbes. Mostly we talk about them as bacteria. There are a few other bacteria-like bugs as well, called archaea. There's also fungi, molds, there's parasites, and there's also viruses living there. So it's a whole jungle out there.
We're a delightful mix of living beings.
And all of them actually are chemical factories. So if you think of them as altogether, it's like an organ. We've got it we've discovered in the last few years a new liver that has all these extra functions that produces vitamins, produces all these chemicals to signal to our body to do things, speed up, slow down, etc., or keep control of our immune system. It all comes from the microbiome, which is a chemical factory, and that's really the best way to think about it. And of course, to keep that factory producing lots of good stuff, you've got to feed it the right stuff. And I think that's the important link here. But it is really key to our immune system, and COVID has really brought that into full focus, the role of diet and immune system. And the microbiome is right in the center of all that. So everyone does need to know about it. Yeah.
Things like sort of use of obviously heavily antibiotics, which is kind of commonplace within medicine right now. It has been for a long time. That clearly knocks out some of that microbiome's activity and quantity. How much of an effect does that have? If our bodies are being compromised by having antibiotics over a number of years, how much does that affect us during COVID for a start? And then how is it affecting us as well from a performance point of view for those that want to try to perform at a high level through exercise and sport and so on? What's the impact been in COVID, first of all?
The effect of COVID on the microbiome seems to only be if you were seriously ill. If you went to hospital, then your microbiome changed quite considerably. And obviously you were given all kinds of drugs then, generally not antibiotics, unless it was by mistake. But
rephrase the question. It's more if someone actually has been taking them before getting COVID. So if they'd had a few years of having it and they've been compromised by that, have they been more susceptible to the symptoms of COVID?
There's some evidence. It's not absolutely barn door because it's also hard to separate out the fact they had some infection for which they needed antibiotics. And so it could have been the underlying infection. We haven't been able to separate out the antibiotics or having some other disease or infection. Certainly there is a link between the two, but from the data we've got, you couldn't really separate out and say, generally, on average, people who took antibiotics were more susceptible to COVID.
They
Okay,
were, really.
they were, but also people, I think, who took some other drugs as well. Some elements of protein pump inhibitors, people that take that for gastric problems, also increase your susceptibility to infection. And most drugs we take, medications we take, as not just antibiotics, all influence the gut microbiome to some extent. But antibiotics definitely are the worst. But the other interesting thing is we're all unique the way we respond to antibiotics. Some people get hardly touched by them and will recover within a couple of weeks back to normal. Others, it will take, say, 2 months, and others, it can take years. So that we don't yet understand that link about how some antibiotics affect some people much more and can be disastrous. So it's a really interesting idea, but we have to maybe change the idea that antibiotics are a harmless medication. There's lots of evidence now in animals and children that they make you more likely to get food allergies and put on weight. And so I think generally will be harmful for many people for their performance through the gut. But people might be lucky. You might be in that 1/3 that can get away with it.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So with the microbiome of the gut, that's being affected by something like taking any form of pharmaceutical, but especially antibiotics. That reduction in the activity of microbiome within the lower gut and colon, in performance terms, if someone is a serious runner, a serious cyclist, a serious athlete of some degree, I guess we can't know quite person to person the effect because each person responds differently to antibiotics in the first place. But is there a percentage compromise that you see on performance if someone's on regular on and off courses of antibiotics or any other form of medication? I mean, how much difference does that make? Athletes do try to avoid taking whatever drugs they can, of course, pharmaceuticals, even cold flu remedies, etc. And of course, more recently, there's been even lots of talk about athletes, including Novak Djokovic, about not taking the vaccine for COVID to make sure there's no compromise in performance. But how much difference would those things make, if any at all?
Well, the real answer is we don't know for sure. I think most people would agree that they are going to make some difference. And I suspect that it's going to be quite individual about which people it's going to, target more. So it might be a case of people doing their own experimentation, looking at their own performance, working it out, which things work for them and which don't. But in general, anything that's going to help hurt the gut microbes, reduce the diversity and richness of the gut microbes, so they're producing less less chemicals, is going to hamper your immune system, which in general will impair your performance. And I think the extent to which it does that is going to vary quite a lot between individuals to make it difficult to give a broad average statement. Because in a way, it's the same with nutrition. You and I can eat exactly the same muffin and have a very different effect on our gut microbes or our peak levels. So in general, you say, yes, probably not good, but there'll be some people it affect a lot and some people hardly at all, is my guess.
But for those who are concerned about having maybe been on antibiotics or any other medication, again, this process of trying to rebuild the gut is going to be one of the key things within there. And the danger perhaps with the social media influence about microbiome is there's an assumption that there are products you can take that are easily bought in shops and online, probiotics, etc., that are going to give you what you need. Now, the problem with those, of course, is they're not necessarily going to be right for what you actually need. And taking a pill, the uncertainty of what's inside there is huge. So are we better off trying to rebuild our gut through purely natural sources of eating it appropriately and making sure we're doing those things to look after ourselves?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. There's a strong chance that the probiotic you pick from the pharmacy or wherever is not going to be the right one for you, or not the right mix of 2 or 3 of these microbes. And you don't know the quality of a lot of this stuff because it's not stringently tested. So unless you've sort of done that experiment before and actually measured what happens, you're much better off going for a wider spectrum of probiotics in food, fermented foods. So For example, there's probably 4 or 5 microbes in yogurt, similar in most cheeses. And if you move up to the next phase, you go to fermented milk, kefir, you've got maybe 15 to 20 different types of microbe. Kombucha, 20 to 30 different types of microbe. Kimchi, 30 to 50 types of microbe. You're really covering your bets, and that broader approach is much safer way to help performance, I think, and without risking some things, because there are some studies show that some probiotics can actually make things worse because they only help grow one particular type of microbe, and that elbows out the other ones. So actually, you can end up with a slightly less diverse microbiota, although you've got more of the healthy one, but you're sometimes not helping the whole community.
And with that sort of thought in mind, for the person who's listening to this and thinking, well, that's great, I'm going to just start eating live yogurt for breakfast in the morning, some kimchi, an avocado at lunchtime. I'm going to have then some sort of various forms of live food through the day. I want to make sure I'm getting all that I need. Is there a point of overdoing that as well and having then too much of that going in? Is your body going to just assimilate those things into the system very well and the gut will just find its own balance? Well, how does that work?
No one has ever shown that you can have too much diversity in your diet. We are omnivores. We've evolved to eat everything, like dogs, really. We don't really have anything that's sort of completely off limits to us, as we can see from the diversity of diets around the world. So I think there's no harm in diversity. And I think that's really what we should all be teaching everything, whether you're a sportsman or you're trying to bring up a young kid. It's to get this idea, move us away from this very bland, limited, restricted diet, low in fresh produce, low in fiber, to something that aspires to have at least 30 different plants a week in that diet.
This is the thing, because the average diet actually in the UK, I think the number's correct. In the UK, we hit around roughly 40 types of plant, I think in the course of a year, rather than in the course of a week even. In America, it's about a shocking low 30. And in various parts of South America and in Africa, I think there's as much as a few hundred types of plant in a year. Their diversity is just so much greater. And the incidence of cancer, colon cancer, diabetes is almost non-existent. Is that right?
That's probably true. We certainly, there's a link between our lack of diversity in our diets in the last 30 years and also the lack of diversity in our microbes. And if you go to African tribes, and I did this a few years ago, I went to see some hunter-gatherer tribes with the BBC, and they have the healthiest microbes in the world. They have like double the species we do. So, and they never get cancer, they never get diabetes, autoimmune disease, nothing. And they eat 500 species of animal, certainly every possible animal you've ever seen they'll eat, plus a huge range of vegetables and plants. But it's a mixture of everything. They don't have antibiotics, of course. They don't have hand washes and gels and clean living. So that they are surrounded by bugs. But it just shows us that we've probably lost half our ancestral microbes through our limited diet and our change in environment that we need to address.
So with that in mind, there's clearly been, both in regular people and athletes in the last few years, a bit of a shift towards vegan eating as well. So there's been a big shift towards that. I think Game Changer made the massive change for lots of guys in particular. There was all sorts of claims on sexual performance that would do by changing to being a vegan. Like a lot of guys jumped aboard straight away and said, I'm in. But actually, behind all of that, there's some pretty solid science, obviously, that says this could be a good idea, whether that's on the anti-inflammatory effects on the body and therefore producing more energy. The diet itself tends to be a bit more carbohydrate loaded rather than being pure protein loaded. So that's actually probably for some people who've been over protein heavy, no bad thing either. So they feel pretty good off the back of it. There's a risk as well, isn't there, with too many types of fish and meat, or maybe pushing up the carnitine levels too high, which could cause a knock-on effect to heart issues potentially. How much of a risk is that, though? So if your athlete's thinking, should I go for this guaranteed protein intake off the meat and the fish side, or shift to being vegan and go with that? Is there a right and wrong way to this? I mean, is the science pointing towards now shifting towards just plant-based eating?
Not exclusively. I don't think there's any data to show that people that eat a small amount of meat or fish are in any way harmed by that. And our own data from big studies in the US and the UK showed that the statistic of there's 30 plants a week as the sweet spot for your maximum gut health. Didn't matter whether you ate meat or fish or you were vegan or vegetarian. So
Really interesting. Okay.
It was really what else you put on the plate that's important. Clearly, if you've got a giant slab of meat there, it's pretty hard to get in enough range of vegetables in a week if you're having enormous amounts of meat or fish. But small amounts, if you make an effort, it's fine. It's just generally easier if you're vegetarian to think diversity of plants because you're not centering your meal around the fish or the meat. I think that's essentially it. So, I don't believe this idea that, meat is deadly or, fish is toxic or whatever. I think it's all a question of degree. And, small amounts, are likely to be fine for virtually all humans. We've evolved for that. Whether some people can have large amounts safely, I think that's another interesting link with the gut microbiome. Some people have microbes that convert meats and some fish, mainly meats, red meats, to a chemical that gets converted by other microbes to something that TMAO that actually furs up your arteries and causes atherosclerosis. But only about a third of people have those microbes. So you could start in the future to manipulate your microbes or do a test to say, can I eat lots of steak or not safely? Or how do I get on, reduce those for a while I fancy a steak next week? We don't know. But this is all very cutting edge science as we see these, how a lot of our ideas of nutrition, which we thought were black and white, are suddenly much more complicated and personalized.
Yeah, absolutely. With that diversity in mind, I do know you once ate just cheese for a month, didn't you?
Yeah, I tried. I didn't get that far, though.
How far did you get?
When I was writing The Diet Myth, I did lots of self-experimentation, and I tried being vegan. I was vegan for 6 weeks, and I did various other diets. I tried drinking olive oil for my breakfast every day as the only thing to do. And
how much did you drink of olive oil in the breakfast? What happened there? Tell me about that.
Well, that experiment only lasted one day. I basically had a sort of, I guess, a half glass of olive oil, and I'd heard about Greek fishermen that do this, although never saw it reported, and so it was quite very good olive oil. Felt a bit strange, but went out and I had a hairdressing appointment, and I ended up going there and fainting in the hairdressers. So something didn't work for me on that one.
Not quite your thing, clearly.
No, it was perhaps this big mass of fat that suddenly hit my gut. But I was doing the cheese diet to see, well, could I change my gut microbes by eating lots of probiotic cheese? So I was having unpasteurized, very smelly, raw milk cheese. And there was a Poisse, I had Roquefort and a Brie de Meaux, and I love cheese. And it was absolutely fantastic for day one. Day two was okay, but by day three, I really, Roquefort for breakfast as a big slab, it just made me feel sluggish and awful. So I stopped, and interestingly, it didn't really shift my microbes that much because I guess the extra cheese didn't seem to really make that big difference to me because I was already a cheese eater.
So it's really where you start from. Okay, so if your balanced body is in one state, it's there somewhere, and you add then certain parts into it, your body just assimilates what goes in if it's used to it, and that's it. Whereas a new substance going in has a profound effect on you. So that's an interesting shift within that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it works. So they've done studies of vegans who eat a burger and meat eaters who go vegan for, say, several weeks. Then you can see profound effects. And generally, it's easier to change someone who has a very bad gut microbiome to a good one than the other way around. But a few years ago, I did experiment on my son, the McDonald's diet for 10 days. And so he ate all his meals. It was like a mini supersized me to check his microbes. So he had to eat all his meals at McDonald's. I was paying, so he was happy. He was a student. and
Right.
he loved McDonald's, so that was great. And at day 4 he wanted to give up, but we discussed it, and he really wasn't feeling very well, uh, which surprised him. And I said, "No way, we're going to continue. We're going to publish this in the Sunday Times," and that's what we did.
As all good dads do, obviously, naturally as well.
He did get to 10 days. He felt awful, and he'd lost 40% of his diversity of his microbes.
And were you tracking his energy levels as well, and so on too? So, I mean, this is the key thing, of course, is if you take someone who's, I'm assuming, fundamentally healthy, had a good diet beforehand, and was eating a normal array of good, fresh foods and diversity in there, and then going to that with that lack of diversity, his energy must have hit the floor, I'm guessing, pretty by day 3 or 4, you're saying, but by the end of 10 days, it must have felt like death.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that saved him is he was a student, so his diet was pretty rubbish anyway.
And his mates were eating the
Um,
same thing at breakfast, lunch, dinner too. So yeah, it's kind of a standard par for the course type thing.
he'd eaten a lot of cheap frozen food and pub food, so it probably wasn't a bigger shock as it would have been for you or I
Yeah, right.
to do that. But he still suffered. But the impact was he'd lost a lot of his species because they were like starved of fiber and nutrients. He wasn't eating anything fresh or with fiber in it. And that effect, despite me sending him food parcels and fruit and veg, he's still got a very poor gut microbiome 5 years later. And
Oh, it's still
this
carried
is,
on that long later, really.
I think it's once you've gone a period of time where you just sort of, you really are, it's like with severe antibiotics, it can take a long while to get these, the good bugs back again. And I think that's the bit of the lesson here, that many people out there eating ultra processed food for long periods of time without, intervals of fruit or plants or fresh produce are going to have really bad guts and immune systems. And I think that's what we're seeing in a lot of, the US and the UK.
And this is only over a period of 10 days. It's quite a short period of time. Okay, he might have been a student as well, so there's different variations either side of that, I guess. But 10 days of intensity, and there's still such a degree of long-term, not damage, but impact down the line. So someone does have a period of 6 months, 12 months, 5, 10 years of eating poorly, then clearly this has a knock-on effect for many, many years thereafter. Are there certain foods that are particularly worse? I mean, things that are the obvious culprits that we think about, fast food, of course, but what about things like alcohol? I mean, alcohol, how does that impact on the gut microbiome?
Well, we studied this in some detail, and I think excessive alcohol is very bad. So once you get above, 5 units a day rather, but alcohol in moderation had no major effects on the gut microbiome. Spirits were generally worse than beers, interestingly, for the same amount of alcohol. And there
Okay.
was one drink that was actually good for your gut microbiome, and that was red wine. So
I guess we're
that was
talking about quantities here as well, though. So, I mean, in terms of someone takes
one
a
to two,
takeaway from this,
one to two
yeah,
glasses. Yeah, not 1 to 2 bottles, 1 to 2 glasses a day of red wine, but not white wine.
I think that's actually more than I thought it would be. I think actually, I have to be honest, I think that my thoughts were that probably no more than a glass a day in terms of being super healthy and good generally. And I say that on the basis of actually not just the microbiome, but the way in which it impacts on our sleep patterns and then the other effects of the inflammatory effects of poor sleep too. I'm sure you wear lots of devices. I wear a Whoop device on my wrist to monitor my sleep tracking and my activity patterns and so on. I know that within that, it asks various questions, a bit like your Zoe app as well, about what you did in a certain day and whether you drank a certain thing or exercised. And for me personally, if I have 1 glass of wine in a given day, the next night's sleep is exactly the same as the night before, no problem at all. 2 glasses of wine, the quality of sleep changes quite significantly, but maybe 5-8% difference in the quality. The duration of deep sleep goes down slightly. A third drink and it drops off a cliff. It goes down so fast. So the actual amount of deep sleep, the REM sleep, all this important restorative sleep all goes away. So on that side, there's obviously another knock-on effect. But at 2 glasses, from a gut point of view, you're broadly okay on red, but not on white.
Yeah, well, I think I said 1 to 2 because people don't record their alcohol very well, as you know. It's quite hard to do
Quite.
it, and and we all cheat. So it's knowing exactly, you have to do very big studies, very detailed ways to look at this. And we didn't do this with the Zoe app. We did this with old-fashioned epidemiology of asking people in questionnaires what they drank. So it's a crude result, but I think uh, I believe your explanation, but I think that's likely to be for you,
Sure.
not generalizable to everybody. Okay, so might be some people who get those effects with one glass, and certainly, if you have Asian genes or anything like that, that's going to be your heart. You can't metabolize alcohol well at all. You'll struggle with that. Others, might be able to tolerate 3 glasses much better. So I think again, it's always difficult when we talk about averages, because I think the new world we'll all have our own averages, what's good for us. But I think, to my mind, what was interesting is that it says, let's talk not just about alcohol as a whole group, but break it down into what's perhaps good alcohol, bad alcohol. Spirits have nothing really good in them at all for your health. What is it in red wine that's good? It's the grape skin. That fruit is still there, and in that grape skin are these polyphenols, these defensive chemicals that are, added with the fermenting process. There's hundreds of different ones which give that health benefit, which probably counteracts the alcohol. And the only other alcohol that came close was artisan ciders, which have a lot of the apple in there and the real fruit. And of course, white wine doesn't keep the contact with the skin as long, so you don't get the same polyphenols. So it does start to make sense, but I think we just need to think about the quality of the foods and drinks we're having, what's in them, rather than labeling everything as the same. And of course, you've got effects not just of the alcohol, but also of the other things that are in that food. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely, entirely. So what's in your day? So what's in terms of how does Tim Spector eat and drink through his normal day? Are you super controlled on this stuff? Is this constantly in your mind about, I know all this information and therefore I've got to keep it to the letter? Or is there a degree of flex within this? And if so, how much is the flex in there?
I'm very flexible. I mean, if someone offers me a fantastic restaurant meal, with a gourmet dining, um, I will go for it, and all my rules will go out the window. I think you have to have rules that are going to last you a lifetime as basic principles, but they don't dominate your life. I try and skip breakfast at least once or twice a week, but sometimes on holiday I won't do that because it's just, I love breakfast, although I know that skipping it actually seems to be good for me. But I have changed quite a lot. So I will always have a fermented food every day, and I make my own kefir and kombucha. I add kimchi whenever I can to my cheese. So I've got a few things that I try and do, but I'm not rigid about it. And I'm starting to bring in more these fasting periods, or delaying my breakfast or cutting it out until lunch. So restricted time eating is starting to become a bigger part of my day than it was. But of course, you've got a family, you've got holidays, you're out on some business. You can't always do this. So you just got to store it away. So I need to do that when I get back.
Yeah, but people are looking at intermittent fasting hugely for, again, lots of media coverage about this. And there's a bit of confusion over how to do that. I've got lots of people who've come to me in the last couple of years in particular, actually, before that too, but more recently it's got to a bigger story, and doing, day-long fasts, 2-day long, 3-day long fasts for various reasons. And actually people with Asian origin backgrounds being advised to go for a way to control their propensity towards diabetes by doing 2-3 day fasts, try to reset the system slightly, and then go into intermittent fasting once per month for forever, for good, and doing it on the basis of every day eating within a 6 to 8 hour window only, and keeping it to be controlled in that time. Now, there's lots of good evidence around that. I mean, this idea about spreading your load into even one meal per day. And there was an interesting study, I think by Wisconsin University, last year to say about trying to have just one meal a day to get all your calories in, and that would be the key to longevity, to give your body a chance to get what it needs to extend its life. Problem with that, of course, is that trying to eat, I don't know about you, but I eat 3,000 plus calories a day. Trying to do that in one sitting would be a disaster. I mean, other than sitting there eating a tub of ice cream, you just couldn't possibly do it. So the 2 meal a day thing spread over the window of 6 to 8 hours looks like a sort of better solution.
Yes, I think one meal a day is just not practical for most people. So I think we should avoid things that are, clearly impractical for long-term use. 2 meals a day, I think, for many people will be an optimum, but some people will prefer to have those early in the day. Some people prefer later in the day. And the Zoe program is, we will eventually get to be able to predict whether you're a morning person or an evening person just from once we collect enough data.
Is there a feel for that yet in terms of how that looks? If you're generally more towards being morning people, is it an even spread? Do we know anything about that data yet?
It seems to change with age. That's the other interesting thing. So, uh, the younger you are, the more you tend to metabolize better in the mornings. And as you get older, actually, your metabolism starts to shift. And mine is actually slightly better in the evenings than the mornings, which is not at all the average. So, a lot of these early studies that we were taught, all based on 12 nutrition students aged 20, and they never looked to see what happened to other people. So we've got a very blinkered view of what standard, metabolism is like, but it's very variable. And so I think people have got to work out for themselves what their best timings are and not look at averages. And I think this is all part of this empowering people in terms of personalized nutrition and working it out. And as people, as sports people do with their performance, they know generally whether they, run better on an empty stomach with a little bit of food, mornings, evenings. Everyone's, you can work that out. I think what this is saying is that all of us need to start working this out, because for many people, there is a big advantage of restricted time eating. I think the evidence is accumulating that it's generally good for us to have more time our guts resting, and the microbes change, and there's good backup for the microbiome world. There's general agreement this is a good thing, that your microbiome has time to recover, to get that gut wall repaired, and that resting process is part of a cycle which goes against all the old dogmas about eating regularly and grazing like a cow. It's absolutely the reverse of that. So I'm in favor of it, but everyone needs to find what their own one that suits them personally. And I'm against long fasts, because I think, like the example of my son, who basically had a equivalent of a 10-day fiber fast, that can cause permanent damage to the microbes. And we don't know what that level is at the moment. So although it sort of sounds really tough, every day, once a year I do a sort of 3-day hunger strike. I don't think it's a good thing until we know much more about whether your microbes will survive that.
Yeah, absolutely. But I know you're a very keen, active sports person. You like to ski. I think you like to go trekking. I think running too, maybe. So, but with all those things that you do, if you were right now trying to go for an approach of optimum performance for an event, say in 2 months' time, to maximize what you can do, what are the things that you would shift? So I know with the diet example, you said that you're quite flexible on that. Would you dramatically shift away from being quite so flexible and go for a bit more of a hard stance on it? Would you use the intermittent fasting more frequently? Would you skip? Would you do fasted cardio as part of that process? Would there be things you would change as someone trying to perform to their optimum level if you have a 2 month window?
Yeah, I mean, if I was a competitive sportsman, I'd take it much more seriously than I do, right? And because your priorities would change. I would definitely be probably doing more restricted time eating. I think that's got general agreement from my colleagues who are also, semi-professional athletes. They're seeing advantages in doing that. But I think you'd also want to sort out in your own mind first how you perform on high fat diets or high carb diets. I've certainly found I get more energy by switching carbs for fats. So when I do have a late breakfast or brunch, it would be mainly fats and protein, very little carbs in that for me.
So more towards a keto style of eating. So you'd shift more towards that approach rather than being for a sort of 40-40-20 split of carbs, protein and fats. You're going to shift much more in that direction.
For me, that's what I found suits me. Yes. I'm loath to give advice because I think other people could be very different, and they are different. And that's why we see, so many runners that, can be carnivores and vegans and whatever. People need to find what suits their own body. But also, I think you need to not just think of the next year, but also, what's long term going to keep you fit and healthy as well. So it's got to be sustainable generally.
And there's things where the keto eating and diet is being kind of put forward as being a pretty possible solution for longevity. It seems to be a lot more evidence going down that line. I think Margaret Jackson, could be at Stanford, has published papers on that as well. Would you say keto has the better chance and possibility of being a thing which is going to extend our life? Is that the way to go? We should be avoiding carbohydrates and avoiding excess proteins. I guess your twin study is part of this thing in terms of seeing how people over time with various diets. I'm not sure keto has been studied in that yet, but whether there's been differences in those people.
Well, keto hasn't been around for very long, so you'd have to study extreme populations around the world, Maasai and Inuit and these sort of people, and they're now doing badly because they've moved into cities and they're all getting diabetes and obesity. But so I don't think we know. A lot of the data is on mice, and I'm loath to extrapolate from either short-term human studies or mouse studies to longevity. So my problem with long-term keto is that most people on those diets don't get the plant diversity. So their microbiomes, whereas they might find short-term benefit, I'm worried they will have long-term harms, and their immune systems won't be as good long-term. I think there's some evidence for, say, fighting cancer or dealing with some drugs or boosting immune system short-term, it can be helpful. But I worry if you focus only on that, the percentage fat, and you don't worry about the whole program, you're going to be long-term worse off than you were. So I think we're still in the very early stages of this. So I think people have to realize that there is a potential downside of keto. We do need to think much more about what other plant diversities they can get. Can they still get their 30 plants a week and do keto? Then that might be the perfect combo if you can do that kind of stuff. So I think we need to realize that it's not just black and white. We need to accept what's working well in the science, but also balance short and long-term objectives.
Yeah, certainly. Because the key thing here, of course, is that if the gut itself is functioning very well, go back to a performance point of view again, cutting out the possibilities, the potential for even the small effects of pre-diabetes, for example. There's been even links, obviously, with the way the gut functions, the way that people have autism. So there's it affects every part of your being. So in trying to go back always into how we're digesting, how we're functioning, that's where we start and finish with what we try and look after within our being and ourselves. How does someone go about understanding where they are? I guess you can obviously go and do symptom tracking, but getting a gut check done, getting a biome check done, it's not straightforward for someone to go and do. What can we do to understand how to try and see where we are?
I guess there's probably three levels. One is to, at a very simple clinical level, like a GP would ask you, would say, well, how many times a week do you go to the toilet? Are you having cramps or spasms? Do you have any symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome, which would suggest your gut health is not good? The second is to do check your transit time, and this is basically a free test anyone can do. You put some food dye, a blue food dye, into something like a muffin, and you see how long it takes to get from one end to another. And we have a website that Zoe set up called the Blue Poop Challenge. 50,000 people have done that, and actually we published on this that it's actually probably the best test around for free that gives you a rough idea of how your gut microbes are doing. It is roughly associated with your gut health. The slower that transit time, the more you need help. But if it's too fast, obviously you need to, you won't be able to run anywhere because you're near the toilet. So
What's the
yeah,
average time? What should it be? And what's kind of long and short we obviously are aware of?
average time is 28 hours. Mine, for example, is 18 hours, but it does vary day to day. So you need to do it a few times to work out exactly. And the sweet spot is, I would imagine, somewhere between 10 and 22 hours, something like that, uh, which might depend on individuals because we have different length intestines as well. But that's an easy way for people to gauge if their diets are reasonably, affecting adversely their their microbes. So if they suddenly become constipated, they're only going every 2 days. You're not something's not right, and I think we need to change that idea. And that's the free version. If you're happy to pay some money, you can get a cheap and cheerful microbiome test called a 16S test, which tests just one gene in all the microbes and gives you a rough idea of what that can do. And you can get those on the internet, or people in the US can get the Zoe kit now, which, as well as doing the CGM, will give you a full metagenome score, which is measuring every gene in every microbe in your body and putting them together, working out whether you've got particular parasites, etc. And I think that's probably the way forward. And of course, from spring 2022 in the UK, people will be able to do that. So I think it's the private sector that's doing this. You cannot get this through just general standard healthcare.
Would you be able to, with that in mind, would you be able to, if everyone could get this done, if everyone understood what the quality of their microbiome was, and we could make the tweaks and changes on lifestyle based on that, would you be able to put a percentage saving for health services on, if we understood that can make changes in interventions rather than dealing with the net effects of what comes out of having poor gut? Is there a change? Obviously, because diabetes right now is the fastest growing cost base in the NHS in the UK. I forget the numbers. That's about 22 billion a year or something amazing. How much of that could be changed, you think, by purely looking at people's gut makeup and making significant changes to their lifestyle?
That's a tough question, but we know that diet, if we improved diet from poor quality diet to good quality diet, we could reduce the burden of the common disease by 40%.
So that's a huge number. So take that, extrapolate that out, and with, again, this would be back of the envelope type stuff, but 40% of a change within that, this is billions of saving potentially by having the interventions, presumably off a fairly low cost testing process. And what could be, I think, via the Zoe app, clearly you could do a great thing with that to make sure people are following things which are very easy to follow, and beyond that process of understanding themselves better.
Yeah. So if you had a tool that enabled people to, in a way, gauge the quality, and then it was a feedback to improve quality. I mean, the alternative is, government action to actually tax rubbish food like cigarettes, and that would pay for all this. But they're not going to do that anytime soon. So I think we have to sort this out ourselves. And I think you're right. Just giving people the idea there's a link between their gut health and the quality of the food they put in is itself an educational exercise, which can make some dent into that 40% of our health budget. So it's huge, and I think the microbiome is helping bring diet back onto the agenda for health, as everyone thinks not about calories anymore, not about macronutrients in this rather primitive sense. It starts to think about the thousands of chemicals that are in food and how they're interacting with our gut microbes, and it's much more sophisticated and clever. It's the most exciting science rather than the most boring one.
Well, Tim, that pretty much summarizes up where we need to get to on that. I think you absolutely nailed it. I think this is the key thing. We've got to go right away from counting of calories, looking too much about this kind of one-size-fits-all approach to how we diet, how we exercise, and what we do to ourselves. The bespoking using of science into this is going to be the game changer going forwards over the next few years, and you're clearly at the spearhead of all of that. So very best of luck with Zoe on its launch here in the UK, and in the US is there right now. It's going to be, I'm sure, a huge success. Can't wait to try it myself as well. It's going to be really good to see how that works out. I think we all think we know ourselves well, and we actually get down to looking at those bits of data. It's surprising which things you really don't know about yourself in particular. So I can't wait to try that out as well. Thank you for your time. It's been great to chat to you, and we'll see you again very soon, no doubt.
It's been a pleasure.